A lonely widow was on the verge of bankruptcy until she accidentally found a secret door in the basement, but what was hidden behind it changed her fate forever. Subscribe and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? The wind swept across the barren hills of Wyoming, carrying with it the smell of dust, rust, and forgotten times. Dry grass bent under the invisible force, whispering against the earth as if trying to hide the emptiness of the land. On the horizon stood a lonely house, its paint peeling, roof sagging under the weight of years and windows dulled by dirt. The ranch had once been a proud outpost of life in these hills, a symbol of hard work and endurance. But now it looked more like a monument to failure. This was the place that Mary Ann Harlow still called home, though no one in the surrounding county could understand why she stayed. The yard bore the scars of abandonment. A tractor sat in silence, its once bright red now flaked away into orange rust. The tires long since collapsed, leaving the heavy machine lopsided like a carcass left to rot. The corral fences leaned in awkward angles, rails missing, posts gnawed away by time and weather. The pastures, which in better years had swelled with cattle, were nothing but a brittle carpet of weeds and dust. The barn sagged at its middle, wooden boards cracked and broken, as though bowing under an invisible weight. Every structure on the land seemed to lean toward ruin, and the ranch had earned its reputation as cursed, whispered about by neighbors as if even the soil beneath it carried some malignant history. Mary Ann, 41 years old and wrapped in the dark wool coat she had mended so many times it carried patches of every decade, walked slowly along the edge of the porch. Her boots, cracked with wear, crunched against the frost that clung to the wooden boards. The chill of the early autumn morning bit into her skin, but it was not the weather that weighed most heavily on her. It was the silence, the emptiness of a life that had been stripped of its meaning the moment her husband had died in the basement of this house 1 year ago. He had been everything to her, her partner in work and in love, the man who had insisted they could make the ranch profitable again, despite mounting debts and a changing world that had little room left for small operations. When he had died, officially in a sudden accident, she had not only lost him, but also the last fragile tether holding her to this place. His absence turned the rooms into tombs of memory. His jacket still hung by the door, his boots sat beside it, a thin layer of dust collecting over them, as if time itself had grown tired of moving forward. His handwriting lingered in ledgers left open on the desk. His favorite knife still rested on the kitchen counter. Everywhere Mary Ann turned, she collided with echoes of him, and yet the house felt hollow, stripped of its voice, because he would never again fill it with laughter or the quiet murmur of his plans. The official report had been simple. A beam in the basement ceiling had given way, collapsing on him while he was working down there. But Mary Ann had never been convinced. She had found his hands covered in lime dust, his lantern extinguished and lying far from his body, as if he had been in the middle of something. He had spoken in his last weeks about the foundation, about strange seams in the stone walls, about an obsession that she had dismissed as grief-driven delusion. He had always been a dreamer, chasing at shadows of old stories. The neighbors said he had gone crazy hunting for treasure, that he had imagined secrets buried under the earth when in truth there was nothing but rock and dust. They had shaken their heads at the funeral, pitying her, whispering about the curse of the Harlow land. Those whispers had only grown louder in the months that followed. Some said the ranch had been doomed since its founding, a place where crops failed, cattle died, and men went mad with futile hope. Others said her husband's death was proof enough that the place should be abandoned. A woman alone, with no children and no income, clinging to a ruin. What sense was there in it? But Mary Ann, though weary and worn thin, could not simply walk away. The land was all she had left of him. To abandon it would feel like abandoning him, and so she stayed. The silence of the nights, however, pressed harder on her than the judgments of neighbors. Often as she sat by the stove in the kitchen, she would hear sounds drifting up from the basement, the faint crack of shifting stone, a hollow knock as though something deep beneath moved when it should not. At times it was a dull rumble, faint enough to make her wonder if her mind was conjuring it. She told herself it was only the old walls settling, or frost expanding in the earth. But something in those sounds made her shiver. She had avoided going down there since the day she found him, and yet the place called to her in quiet, uneasy ways. Now time had run out. The bank's letter, folded and worn from her anxious handling, lay on the kitchen table. 3 days remained until officials would come to seize the ranch. 3 days until the land, the house, and every broken relic within it would be sold off to cover her debts. She had counted the dollars left in her possession again and again, each time reaching the same grim conclusion: there was no saving it. Even selling the last of her cattle would not meet the sum demanded. She was to lose everything. That night she sat by the window, staring out at the pale moon, casting long shadows across the barren pastures. She thought about leaving. She could pack her clothes, take her husband's photograph, and never return. But something within her resisted. Something in the way the shadows fell across the barn, in the faint groan that rose again from the floorboards, told her she was not finished with this place. There was something more, something waiting to be uncovered, as if her husband's death had only scratched the surface of a story that had not yet been told. In the cold light of dawn, Mary Ann decided she would not leave without facing what lay beneath. The basement had been a place of fear, of loss, of unanswered questions, but it was also the last place her husband had been alive. If there was truth to be found there, she owed it to him and to herself to discover it. She gathered a lantern, a heavy hammer, and the old iron pry bar from the shed. Dust covered her gloves, and her breath clouded before her as she stood before the basement door, its wooden frame warped but still holding the iron latch firm. Her heart pounded as she lifted the latch. The hinges groaned, and the smell of earth and stones seeped out like a long-held breath. The air was colder than it should have been, colder than any mere cellar deserved. She set the lantern alight, its warm glow struggling against the darkness below. Slowly, carefully, she stepped onto the stairs, her boots creaking against the old planks. Each step echoed as if the walls themselves were listening. The descent felt like crossing into another world, one that had been waiting for her since the night of his death. The stone walls pressed close, lined with cobwebs and dust, and the silence was so deep it seemed to absorb her breath. She gripped the hammer tighter, her knuckles white inside the gloves, as the last sliver of daylight from above vanished when the door swung shut behind her. Ahead stretched the gloom of the basement, and somewhere within it lay the truth of her husband's final moments, a truth buried in stone and silence, waiting for her to break it open. And so began her journey, not into ruin as the neighbors believed, but into the heart of the mystery that had haunted her nights. Oblivion had held her long enough. Now she would walk into the shadows of the past, and in that darkness, perhaps, she would find the reason her husband had given his life for this land. The air in the basement was sharper than she remembered, carrying a damp chill that clung to her skin, as if the stone walls themselves exhaled. The lantern's light wavered across the room, showing the clutter left as it had been on the day of her husband's death. Old crates half collapsed in corners, wooden beams leaning against the walls, and a workbench where rusted tools were scattered in no discernible order. Dust shimmered in the glow, unsettled by her presence, drifting like pale smoke. Mary Ann's footsteps sounded heavier than they were, each thud swallowed by the silence, each movement amplified by the emptiness. It was as though the house above had ceased to exist, and she had entered another world beneath it, a sealed chamber where time was slower, heavier, older. She forced her breathing into a steady rhythm and let her eyes roam over the stone walls. For months she had avoided this place, too afraid of the memories, too consumed by grief to face it. But now, with foreclosure looming, the space seemed to command her attention. The lantern illuminated the masonry, rough stone bound together with mortar, though in the far corner, something caught her attention. There, where the wall bent into shadow, the stones were different, more uniform, more deliberate. Unlike the crude, irregular blocks of the rest of the foundation, these were cut in neat squares, fitted with a precision that looked almost modern despite the dust of decades. She moved closer, lantern raised high, and crouched to examine the line where one section of wall met the other. The seam was unnatural, too perfect, as though a door had been hidden and forgotten. Mary Ann brushed her gloved hand across the surface, and flakes of old cement crumbled away at her touch. Beneath them, the outlines of a deliberate pattern emerged. She felt her heart quicken. This was no accident of construction, no quirk of the original builders. Someone had sealed this place intentionally. Her husband had seen it, perhaps even worked at it in his last hours, and whatever he had uncovered had cost him his life. She tightened her grip on the hammer. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Open the wall and risk what lay beyond, or leave it sealed forever. But she had not come this far to turn back. The first strike of the hammer rang through the basement, startling in the silence. Cement dust puffed into the air, dry and acrid. She struck again, harder, and a chip flew off, revealing darker stone beneath. Blow after blow echoed, each one loosening her fear as much as it loosened the wall. The physical exertion steadied her thoughts, focused her energy into the task. Time dissolved into the rhythm of her work, the steady swing of the hammer, the sound of impact, the gradual disintegration of the barrier. Her arms ached, sweat trickled down her spine despite the chill, but she did not stop. She imagined her husband in this same spot, laboring with the same determination, convinced that something extraordinary lay hidden behind these stones. At last, after what felt like hours, a fracture spread across the wall, and part of the cement gave way in a cascade of rubble. Behind it gaped a hollow space, black and silent. She paused, lantern held forward, watching as the light was swallowed by the void. The dust stung her throat, and she coughed, but a strange exhilaration coursed through her. She pulled at the loosened stones, levering them out with the pry bar until a crude archway was revealed. Beyond it stretched a narrow corridor descending at a slight angle into the earth. The passage smelled of damp and rust, the scent of stone long closed off from the air. Marianne hesitated only a moment before ducking inside. The walls pressed close, her shoulders nearly brushing the rough rock, and the floor was uneven, packed dirt strewn with fragments of wood and something that looked like charred torch remnants. She felt the weight of years pressing down on her, as though she were trespassing into a part of the world not meant for light or human breath. Each step forward was accompanied by the soft crunch of earth under her boots and the faint rustle of cobwebs clinging to her coat. The corridor widened abruptly, opening into a chamber larger than the basement itself. The lantern's glow spread across walls of massive stone blocks, cut and arranged with a precision that suggested skilled craftsmanship. The ceiling rose into a vaulted arch, higher than she had expected underground, and the acoustics of the place magnified her movements, every scrape and breath returning to her in echoes. At the center of the chamber loomed a door iron, tall and heavy, its surface mottled with rust, yet still bearing faint decorative patterns that hinted at a more refined origin. The sight stopped her where she stood. She had stumbled upon something monumental, something designed to endure. Around the chamber lay evidence of others who had found this place before her, though long ago. Broken crates lay collapsed in piles, their contents long since rotted away. Nails and rusted hinges dotted the floor like scattered bones. A length of rotted rope coiled in one corner, brittle to the touch. Whoever had come here had tried and failed, leaving only traces of their attempt. The great iron door remained shut, its lock enormous and archaic, a relic from a century past. Marianne approached cautiously. The lantern reflected weakly against the iron, showing faint engravings worn by time, but still legible if one looked closely. She traced the shapes with her fingers, swirls, perhaps symbols, though she could not discern their meaning. The lock was fused with rust, but the hinges appeared intact. She thought of her husband, of the papers he had pored over, of the whispers he had spoken about a secret in the foundation. He must have known of this door, must have been searching for the way to open it. A shiver passed through her as she imagined his final hours here, struggling, determined, before fate cut him down. Her arms trembled from fatigue, but determination rose in her chest. She set down the lantern, adjusted the pry bar, and wedged it into the gap between lock and frame. The metal groaned as she pressed with all her strength. Nothing moved. She shifted her stance, pressed again, gritting her teeth. The sound of strained iron filled the chamber, sharp and loud in the silence. Sweat streaked her forehead, her shoulders burned, but she pushed harder. A crack split the quiet as rust flaked free, and with a screech that reverberated off the stone, The lock gave way. The door shuddered under the force, then slowly, agonizingly, began to swing inward. A draft of stale air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of dust, earth, and something metallic. She raised the lantern high and peered into the darkness revealed beyond. For a moment she could not comprehend what she saw. The light shimmered across surfaces that gleamed faintly, dull but unmistakable. The chamber beyond was lined with shadows, but in those shadows was a suggestion of order, rows, shapes, something waiting in silence. Marianne stepped inside, her heart pounding. The lantern revealed wooden chests stacked against the far wall, their lids closed but intact, their surfaces covered with thick layers of dust. Some bore markings, faded letters and symbols stenciled in paint. In the center of the room stood a larger shape, squat and square, its metal face catching the lantern's glow. It was an old safe, its door embossed with ornate scrollwork and the faint outline of a name almost erased by rust. She felt the blood rush in her ears. This was no mere storage cellar. This was a vault, a place designed to protect and conceal. Her knees felt weak as she advanced further, sweeping the lantern across the chamber. More crates littered the floor, some broken open to reveal rusted tools, shards of glass, and the remnants of what might once have been mining equipment. The stillness of the room was suffocating, as though it had been sealed for over a century and was reluctant to be disturbed. Yet there was no denying what it was. Her husband had been right. Beneath the ranch lay a secret deliberately hidden, guarded by stone and iron, left untouched by generations who had walked above it unaware. Marianne placed the lantern on a crate and stepped back, trying to steady her breathing. Awe and fear wrestled inside her, mingling with grief and a strange exhilaration. She had crossed a threshold into something extraordinary, something that might explain not only her husband's obsession, but perhaps the string of misfortunes that had plagued this land. And yet she knew instinctively that this discovery was only the beginning. Behind these crates, inside that safe, lay the truth, and with truth would come consequences. The chamber whispered with silence, heavy and ancient, as if waiting for her to make the next move. Marianne stood in the lantern's glow, trembling but resolute, and felt that she had finally stepped into the story her husband had died chasing. The open door had revealed not only a vault but a destiny, one that would draw her deeper into secrets buried for generations, secrets sealed in gold, iron, and blood. The lantern flickered as though the air itself were unsettled by her presence. Marianne stood among the dust and the relics, the iron door creaking faintly behind her as if unwilling to close again. Unwilling to trap her, but equally unwilling to release what had been sealed within for so long. The chests and crates before her seemed alive in their silence, looming with the weight of decades, maybe centuries, their secrets hidden beneath dust and cobwebs that clung to them like funeral shrouds. She could hear her heartbeat echoing in her ears, each throb louder than the faint hiss of the lantern. She knew she had uncovered something vast, but the full gravity of it had not yet sunk in. Slowly she moved forward, her boots crunching on gravel and brittle fragments of wood that disintegrated under her weight. The closest chest was marked with faint letters in paint so faded it was nearly illegible. She knelt, brushing her hand across the surface until she could distinguish a stenciled word, "Provisions," beneath the grime. She tugged at the lid, but the hinges resisted, swollen with rust. After several tries it gave way, snapping loose with a groan, and the inside revealed nothing but remnants of burlap sacks. She dug her fingers into the brittle fabric, finding only dust and fragments of grain that had long since turned to powder. Her breath left her in a long sigh, disappointment washing over the surge of hope. But as she turned, her lantern's glow struck the safe in the middle of the chamber, and her heart skipped. Its presence seemed deliberate, monumental, as if it were the true heart of this secret place. She rose and crossed to it, her steps slower now, each one pulled by a mixture of dread and determination. The safe was larger up close, its metal face decorated with scrollwork that had once been elegant, but was now dulled and flaking. At its center gleamed the faint outline of a dial, frozen with rust. She ran her hand across it, her glove catching on grooves, and felt the strange pull of destiny. Her husband had found the safe, she thought. Perhaps he had tried to open it, failed, and died here in the attempt. She crouched before it, trying the dial, but it would not turn. She pressed her ear to the cold surface, listening, though she did not know what she hoped to hear. The silence inside was thick, impenetrable, as though the safe held its breath, keeping its treasures or its curses hidden. She drew back, feeling the weight of her hammer at her side. To force it open would take time, and strength she was not sure she still possessed, but she could not ignore it. Something in her bones told her the safe was the key, the reason this place had been built and hidden. Yet she was not ready to break it open just yet. Her gaze moved to the other crates, stacked haphazardly, some collapsed, others intact. She forced herself to explore them, if only to delay the moment when she would have to face the safe. The next chest opened more easily, the wood cracking under her pry bar. Inside lay metal canisters, dented and sealed, their labels unreadable. She lifted one and shook it gently, hearing the faint rattle of something solid inside. She set it aside, unease prickling at her skin. Another box contained glass bottles, some shattered, their contents evaporated long ago, others still corked but filled with liquids that had turned dark and cloudy. She could not tell if they had once been medicine, spirits, or something else entirely. In the corner she found something stranger still. Wrapped in rotted cloth was a ledger, its leather cover stiff and flaking. But when she opened it carefully, the pages inside were surprisingly intact. Faded ink scrawled across them in neat handwriting, columns of numbers and names. She raised the lantern closer and read. These were records, transactions, lists of shipments, tallies of goods. The dates stretched back over 100 years, far older than the ranch itself. Her brow furrowed as she traced her finger down a column. Quantities of silver, barrels of whiskey, crates of rifles, and beside them, names none she recognized, but all recorded with a meticulous precision. Mary Ann's stomach tightened. This was no ordinary storage vault. It was part of something larger, something organized, something secret. Her husband had hinted at hidden histories, at the ranch being more than it appeared, but she had dismissed it as a grieving man's fantasy. Now she felt the truth pressing on her chest like a physical weight. This vault had belonged to men with power, men who had hidden their wealth and their dealings beneath the earth, and her husband had discovered it. The thought that he had died not by accident, but because of what he uncovered, seeped into her mind like poison. She stood frozen in the glow of the lantern, imagining him kneeling where she now stood, running his fingers across the same records, realizing the scale of what lay beneath their feet. Had someone silenced him, or had the secrets themselves taken his life? She closed the ledger and set it aside, her hands trembling. The safe loomed before her again, impossible to ignore. She approached it, crouched once more, and raised the hammer. The metal rang as she struck it, sparks leaping in the lantern light. The clang echoed through the chamber, sharp and violent. She hit again and again, the vibrations traveling up her arms until her bones ached. The rust cracked, but the safe held. She shifted the pry bar into the seam of the door, pressing with all her weight. The iron groaned, resisting, but she refused to yield. Her husband had died with this secret. She would not let it remain sealed. At last, with a screech that made her teeth clench, the door shifted. She gasped, throwing her shoulder into the bar, and the safe yawned open a fraction, just enough to release a gust of air stale with the scent of metal and age. She pried further until the gap widened, the hinges shrieking, until finally the door swung open. Inside, stacked in neat rows, were bricks metallic, heavy, their surfaces dulled with tarnish, but still gleaming faintly where the lantern struck them. Mary Ann reached forward, her hands shaking, and lifted one. It was heavier than anything she had ever held, its weight undeniable, its meaning impossible to mistake. Gold. The realization crashed over her like a wave, staggering her. The safe was filled with it, bricks upon bricks, stacked to the brim. More wealth than she could have imagined in her lifetime, hidden beneath her feet all along. Her knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, clutching the bar of gold to her chest. Tears sprang to her eyes unbidden, a flood of grief and relief and terror all at once. Her husband had been right. He had not been chasing shadows. He had found something real, something powerful, something that explained the curse of this land, and now she had it in her hands. But as the shock began to fade, a deeper fear crept in. Secrets of this magnitude were never left unguarded, never forgotten without reason. If this gold had been hidden, if men had killed or died to conceal it, then what did it mean that she now held it? Was this discovery salvation or damnation? Her mind swirled with possibilities. She could pay off the debts, save the ranch, restore everything she had lost. But she could also bring ruin upon herself, draw the attention of forces far greater than a small-town bank. Marianne rose slowly, the gold bar still clutched tight in her hands. The lantern's flame wavered, casting her shadow long against the chamber walls. She felt the silence pressing in on her, heavier now, as though the vault itself disapproved of her intrusion. She placed the bar back into the safe with trembling hands and shut the door gently, though she knew it would not lock again. The discovery was hers now, and with it came a burden she could scarcely bear. As she turned toward the iron door that led back to the basement, she felt the weight of the ranch above her, the emptiness of the fields, the whispers of the neighbors, the memory of her husband's broken body. Everything had changed in a single moment. She had gone in search of answers and had found treasure, but treasure was never simple. It was a promise and a curse, a light in the darkness and a shadow on the soul. The lantern flickered once more, and she gripped it tight, stepping back through the passage, her mind consumed with the enormity of what she had uncovered. The gold waited below, silent and patient. But Marianne knew that the moment she had opened that safe, she had set in motion something that could not be undone. Marianne did not sleep that night. She lay awake on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where moonlight leaked through the cracks in the old roof, painting pale lines across the wood. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the glint of gold, the weight of the bar in her trembling hands, the heavy silence of the vault pressing down on her as if it disapproved of her very breath. The discovery had not brought relief. Instead, it gnawed at her thoughts, dragging her deeper into a restless fog of fear and wonder. The next morning came gray and cold, the sun hidden behind a sheet of clouds that gave no warmth. She rose early, moving through the house like a ghost. She brewed coffee but left it untouched on the table, the steam curling into nothing. Every sound seemed louder, every creak of the old boards sharper, as if the house itself had woken to watch her. She found herself glancing toward the basement door again and again, as though it might open of its own accord and release the weight of what she had uncovered. At first, she told herself she must leave it hidden. No one could know. If the neighbors ever heard of it, word would spread like fire. Men would come, men with hunger in their eyes, men with questions she could never answer. The gold would bring nothing but ruin. And yet she also thought of the bank's letter, of the men who would come in 2 days to strip her of the ranch, of the shame of being turned out of her home like a beggar. That gold could save her. It could save everything. Her husband's death pressed in on her thoughts as if he were standing behind her. Had he died for this secret? Had he been silenced because he was close to the truth? She remembered the way she had found him, his body twisted, his face pale, his hands coated in dust. She had told herself it was an accident, though she never believed it. Now, the ledger's numbers and the gold in the vault gave her a new explanation, one that tightened her chest with dread. Perhaps he had paid the first price of discovery, and she would pay the next. She tried to distract herself with chores, feeding the last 2 cattle, checking the broken fences, sweeping the porch. But each task felt hollow, meaningless against the enormity of what lay beneath her feet. She caught herself glancing toward the horizon, half expecting riders to appear. Armed strangers come to claim what had been hidden for generations. More than once, she thought she saw figures at the far edges of her land, shadows that vanished when she blinked. Paranoia dug into her, but she could not shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, knew. By afternoon, she found herself back in the basement, lantern lit, breath fogging in the stale air. The iron door loomed, and beyond it the vault waited, patient and silent. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her boots crunching on gravel. The safe stood where she had left it, its door ajar, the stacks of gold gleaming faintly in the light. She approached slowly, her chest tightening with every step. She touched the bars again, feeling the weight of one as she lifted it, cradling it against her chest. It was real, impossibly real, a fortune beyond imagination. And yet, with every second she held it, she felt less like an owner and more like a thief. The gold was not hers. It belonged to men who had hidden it, men who had kept it secret for reasons she could only guess. Men who, if still alive, would not let her keep it without a fight. The ledger whispered from the corner where she had left it. She opened it again, scanning the names and numbers. The further she read, the more a pattern emerged. This was not just hidden wealth, it was organized, deliberate. Shipments, exchanges, payments. Her husband had uncovered a network, a secret history buried under their land. She traced one name again and again, one that recurred throughout the pages, a man whose family still lived in the county. The realization froze her blood. This was not a forgotten secret. This was a living one. The lantern guttered, its flame shrinking, and she closed the safe with trembling hands, pushing the door until it groaned shut. She replaced the ledger where she had found it, but the unease remained. She could not put the truth back to sleep. She had awoken it, and now it hung over her like a storm. That night she dreamed of footsteps above her, of men's voices echoing through the halls, of boots on the stairs descending into the basement. She woke with a start, drenched in sweat, the silence of the house oppressive. She listened, holding her breath, convinced that she had truly heard movement. But there was nothing. Only the whisper of the wind against the windows, the groan of the old timbers. She lay back down, her heart still hammering. The following day she began to notice small things. A gate she was certain she had closed stood open. Tracks in the dirt that did not belong to her boots led toward the barn and then vanished. A figure on horseback far down the road paused for too long, watching her, before riding on. Her paranoia grew into certainty. Someone knew. Perhaps they had always known, watching her and her husband, waiting for the moment the vault would be uncovered. She considered leaving, taking what gold she could carry and fleeing far away. But where would she go? And how long until someone followed? The gold was too heavy to take in secret, too conspicuous to spend without questions. She was trapped, bound to the secret as surely as her husband had been. By evening, when the sun bled red across the horizon and the ranch lay in shadow, Mary Ann sat at the kitchen table, the bank's letter before her, the lantern burning low. Her hands trembled as she held her husband's knife, the blade catching the light. She felt him beside her, his presence heavy in the room. He had tried to tell her. He had died for this. And now the burden had passed to her. The price of discovery was not the gold itself. It was the eyes it drew, the danger it carried, the way it turned her home into a trap. She could not undo what she had seen, nor could she return to the life she had known before. The vault was part of her now, its secret burned into her soul. And in the silence of that night, with the lantern guttering and the wind pressing at the windows, Mary Ann understood at last that she was no longer the owner of the ranch. She was its keeper, its prisoner, bound to its hidden wealth and its endless shadow. The house seemed to breathe around her, the floorboards creaking, the walls groaning, the basement calling with its silent weight. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her, but sleep did not come. She knew there would be no peace, not while the gold waited below, not while the eyes of the past and perhaps the present remained fixed upon her. The secret was hers now, but secrets had a way of consuming those who carried them. And Mary Ann, sitting alone in the dim light, felt the price pressing down on her shoulders like the weight of all the gold in the world. Don't miss out on more shocking stories like this. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you'll never miss the next twist. Check out the next video on your screen right now for even more unbelievable discoveries. And if this story gave you chills, share it with your friends. They won't believe it until they see it.